Hello, welcome to Issues and Ideas. I'm Chris DeBello. Regarding the U.S. Constitution, the framers worked to define its various ideas and elements as best as possible. Their original intent can be realized in the words of the document, along with the numerous notes and letters that the framers addressed their work through. Additionally, numerous times over the years, the U.S. Supreme Court reinforced the Constitution when it was being challenged. This past week, Trump administration took aim at the idea of birthright citizenship, which is established by the 14th Amendment. This is certainly not the first time the U.S. Supreme Court has been called on to examine immigration and citizenship issues. Joining us to take a look at how the two sides presented their respective cases and whether legal history supports either is Vice President of Legal Affairs with the Landmark Legal Foundation, Michael O'Neill. How are you today, Michael?
I'm good, Chris. Good to be with you.
Good to be talking with you again, too. LandmarkLegal.org is the website. Starting as a foundation for you to listen, let me read you Section 1 of the 14th Amendment. All persons born or naturalized in the United States, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privilege or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of the life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the law. So that's the foundation we're working with here. What was the case that the Trump administration is making? It seems like they're hanging on the phrase subject to the jurisdiction of the United States.
Right. The court, President Trump issued an executive order interpreting the birthright citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment, which you just specified, as to meaning more than subject to the jurisdiction thereof means more than mere territorial presence. And now the common interpretation of that provision, again, subject to born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. The common interpretation of that for the past 70 or so years, at least since we've had the advent of all of the immigration, has been that anybody who's born within the territorial confines, territorial jurisdiction of the United States is conveyed automatic birthright citizenship. Simply being born here makes you a citizen. Now, they are challenging that interpretation, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And that's what a lot of the arguments focused on earlier this week is, what does that mean? And so how do you try to define, how do you try to understand what is subject to the jurisdiction thereof mean? Well, the court tried to you stand in the shoes of the individuals, the ratifiers and the drafters of that provision of the 14th Amendment. You start with, well, what was the time frame where the 14th Amendment was ratified? Well, you're talking about this is post-Civil War. This is the Reconstruction era. So the first thing you derive from that is, well, this was passed post-slavery, right? The 13th Amendment outlawed slavery, and the 14th Amendment wanted, what was the goal of this? Who is this to apply to? And I think you could start with the argument that this was originally, the drafters never considered immigrants, right? That wasn't something on their mind. What was forefront of their mind? Well, that was the children, former slaves and their children and their descendants. They didn't want to see efforts by recently readmitted or in the process of readmitted states making efforts to denaturalize those individuals who were former slaves or their children. So the application, of course, was for former slaves. It was never intended originally to apply to immigrants. And I think that's where you start with. But a lot of the arguments centered on that term. What does subject to the jurisdiction thereof mean?
Now, just hypothetically, if the Supreme Court were to agree with that, would that not mean they were disagreeing with the 1898 decision, U.S. versus Wong Kim Ark, which the Supreme Court then said a child born in the U.S. to non-citizen parents was a U.S. citizen under the 14th Amendment?
Right. That's a fantastic question. There was a lot of discussion about the applicability and what exactly Wong Kim Ark means. And there's a sophisticated, if you listen to oral arguments or read the transcript, there was an in-depth analysis of that case. And you can read, it's funny when you read these cases 100 years, 130 years after the fact, is you read it and you try to, if you're an advocate and it's against you, you try to find how you could interpret the case to maybe be beneficial to you. And I think the Solicitor General took that to heart and noted that there's an extensive discussion. And actually the issue in front of the court and what they were called upon to decide was whether a domiciliary, and this is somebody who was, if you think about it, you could distinguish the case, or you can use the case to help you, or you can find language that helps you, or you can just offer the argument that it was wrongly decided. think here the Solicitor General said, look, number one, the child in Wong Kim Ark, who was found to have birthright citizenship, a right to it, was here legally, right? His parents were here legally, and also he was a domiciliary, and that was an issue that came up repeatedly in Wong Kim Ark, whether you had to have a domicile in the United States to establish jurisdiction, and that I think they said the word domicile comes up about 22 times in the opinion here. So I think what the Solicitor General was kind of hanging on with regards to finding support from Wong Kim Ark was the simple fact that the court assumed that a domiciliary, somebody who was a domicile who made their residence in the United States, was subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And you could distinguish that from the executive order, where you're talking about people who are here illegally and who might simply cross the border to have a child. You're talking about anchor babies, or you're talking about birth tourism. There's no establishment of that domicile. Therefore, there's no establishment of jurisdiction. So that's a jump that the Solicitor General was asking the court to make. But I think they were taking Wong Kim Ark, the case you mentioned, Chris, head on and trying to say, hey, look, rather than interpreting this to hurt us, you can actually interpret this in a manner that actually helps the president's arguments.
While the Solicitor General of the Trump administration wants to expand the limitations of the 14th Amendment, doesn't the phrase subject to the jurisdiction thereof automatically set the bar for limitations of the 14th Amendment, primarily residents of any Native American under the reservation laws? Diplomats come to mind, too.
Yeah, exactly. What you're saying there is, and that goes back to the time of the enactment of the ratification and the enactment of the 14th Amendment, is that the drafters carved out exceptions, and they knew that that this wasn't an all-encompassing right to convey to anyone and everyone, and so they knew that there were limitations in place here. That means they never meant that subject to the jurisdiction thereof encompassed every person who was born in the United States. Obviously you're talking about individuals who were Native Americans at the time, and then you're talking about children of diplomats. So that was kind of used, and Justice Thomas explored that a little bit. Well, what was the common thread of those exceptions? Well, they all lacked the domicile effort. So that was kind of what we were talking about. So therefore, you could say, again, we're talking about, what are we trying to do? What was the court trying to do here? What is the court trying to do? It's trying to discern the best meaning of subject to the jurisdiction thereof. One other thing that I don't know if it was discussed yesterday, one other interesting thing is you read the entire Section 1 of the 14th Amendment. There's another part in there you said regarding equal protection and due process rights is extended to individuals, persons who are within the jurisdiction. So look at that. So you actually see within the 14th Amendment, you see two terms. You see subject to the jurisdiction, and you actually also see within the jurisdiction. I think you can make an argument that within the jurisdiction is territorial presence, because within, I think that's clear what that means. So anybody within the territorial jurisdiction of the United States is within the jurisdiction. And you could say, well, why are there two different words mean? If the drafters wanted to use within the jurisdiction earlier in the 14th Amendment, i.e. in the birthright citizenship clause, in the citizenship clause, they could have said within the jurisdiction. Instead, they used subject to the jurisdiction. I know this is a lot of lawyery talk about here, but words have meanings, and that's what we're trying to get at. What is the meaning of the term subject to the jurisdiction? So there's a little bit of textual support for the interpretation of the president. Now, let me be clear here. I don't think that there are, a lot of commentators are making this case, and it's probably something you haven't already heard, but it's very skeptical. The general takeaway was the court was probably skeptical about the authority of the president to do this. And I think that at some point, the odds certainly are in favor of those who are challenging this executive order. In other words, there's a fairly decent chance, a fairly large chance, honestly, that the president loses. Now, to the degree which he loses is something that remains to be seen about how the court crafts its opinion. But let me be clear. I'm making a lot of good cases for why Donald Trump and the Trump administration should win. There were a lot of arguments that were proffered on the other side that were saying why he should lose, and I think the court might have been a majority of the justices might have been more amenable to some of those arguments.
And certainly the court, as well as the opponents of what the Trump administration is trying to do here, they can, along with the Constitution, if they want to further their argument, they have the Immigration Nationality Act of 1952, which just reinforces the narrow exceptions of the 14th Amendment versus trying to expand the limitations of the 14th Amendment.
Yeah, let me talk about the implications there, because I think this is probably an interesting take on this. Now, when I talk about losses, there's degrees of loss here that we're talking about, and there's also degrees of victory. Now, if the court engages in a constitutional analysis and simply concludes, now that's a high stakes, right? If the Supreme Court is saying that the 14th Amendment conveys a birthright citizenship, in other words, a right to citizenship by virtue of your territorial birth in the United States. If they find that that's a right, that right is enshrined within the 14th Amendment, just like our right to free speech is enshrined in the First Amendment. That means if you're going to pass, any law that contradicts that, seeks to limit that right, is unconstitutional. And the only way to amend it is by constitutional amendment. Now, if the court simply limits its analysis to the law, and you just posited the laws, the INA of 1940 and 1952, which even though the language largely mirrors it, if the court simply says, and they don't get into a constitutional analysis, if they simply limit their analysis to the law, and how does the court do that? Well, they say, okay, well, the intent of of Congress in 1952 was that this applies to anybody born here. We're not going to get into what they meant with the 14th Amendment. We're just going to simply say the executive order is contrary to the law, i.e., the INA that you just talked about, and the president's executive order is vacated, is null and void. So they throw that out. But what does that do? That preserves a political resolution of this. In other words, Congress passed a law in 1952, as you just said, Chris. They can pass a law in 2027 saying that birth tourism is illegal. And so there is that preservation. So what happens here is we're talking about high stakes here. We're talking about stakes. The stakes are, if there's a constitutional analysis and a constitutional decision, a majority of the justices determine that the only way to make any change after that interpretation is via constitutional amendment. If they only rule on the law, then you have the political branches that can make a change. Now, again, I'm aware of Congress and how inept they are. But the court can kind of wash its hands and say, hey, look, we've preserved the political process here. If the political branches want to solve this problem, then it's their problem that they can solve. And so we're only going to rule on the law on this. We're going to utilize what is known as the canon of constitutional avoidance and not get into saying what the 14th Amendment means. Now, again, Trump could win huge, right? He could say, no, subject to the jurisdiction thereof means this is limited, and Trump's executive order is consistent with that. He could win big, but he could also lose big, or he could lose little or win little. You see what I'm saying? It's complicated, yeah. But it's important to understand these distinctions.
And plus the implications of whatever the ruling happens to be, there still could be a path into what the goal of the executive order was. We have to wrap up here, but the expected ruling is going to be sometime toward the end of June, if you want to keep an eye out for that. Learn more about this issue and other legal issues of the Landmark Legal Foundation's focus, landmarklegal.org. Here's the Vice President of Legal Affairs, Michael O'Neill. Michael, thank you for the insight, the education today. Always appreciate it.
Take care, Chris. Have a great day.
Imagine that you're in a casino at the blackjack table. Had a great run. Nice stack of $100 chips in front of you. It's time to leave, so do you get up and leave those chips on the table? Well, the casino would love it if you did that, but no, of course not. My next guest with her new book teaches you how that's exactly what you're doing when you file your taxes. You're leaving money on the government's table, and boy, the government loves that. Her book will not only help the last-minute filers, but also help everyone plan better for next year. She presents all this and deduct everything, hundreds of tax tips, legal write-offs, credits, and loopholes. She's a financial advisor at Lebenthal Global Advisors, columnist at the Daily Signal, host of the podcast Women, Wealth, and What Matters. Tracy Byrnes. How are you today, Tracy?
I'm excellent. Chris, how you doing?
Good to have you here. And TracyByrnesWealth.com is Tracy's website. We do have the link at our homepage as well. Check out her book. More importantly, get her book, because you are amazing, Tracy. 254 tips, and your book is not the size of a Nelson DeVille novel, which those things usually ran like 700 pages, so well done on that.
Thank you very much. And I'm a little bit of a movie buff, so there's a bunch of movie references in there, too. I tried very hard to make it as fun as possible, even though I realized taxes and fun is a complete oxymoron. But it's one of those things in life we have to get through, so we might as well have a good time doing it.
Let's start with some basics, because when you sit down to do your tax filing, it's, even at the last minute when you might be rushing, you're even more prone to missing out on the blatant and the obvious. Some of the basics like deductions and credits, what's the major ones someone has to look at in this last few days of filing?
Well, I think the good news is the standard deduction is higher, so you might not have to go through the itemized deductions on Schedule A, depending on your income level. I think a lot of people miss out on things around their kids, right? The dependent care deduction. Do you send your kid to summer camp so you can go to work? That's a deduction, believe it or not. There's a lot of things for families in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, believe it or not. I think tax on tips has been a little misleading out there. You have to report all your tips. You want to pay into Social Security and Medicare, even though I don't know if I'm going to get it, but I'd like to believe my parents are. So, but you still need to report it, and then you see if you qualify for this $25,000 deduction. Same with overtime. Again, misleading. Please report all your overtime. You don't want to have to pay back interest and penalties on income you haven't reported. Report it all, then see if you qualify for the $12,500 deduction. So there's a lot in there, but I think my biggest tip is to take your time and flip through the book. That's why we did it in little bits and pieces. Flip through, see if things apply to you, then read the tip. Either take it to your preparer, or if you're like me, I actually use the online preparation programs. Pour your drink of choice, sit down, be patient, walk through it, answer every single question, because then you'll be able to see what you actually qualify for.
Help the person, especially new homeowners, understand the SALT deduction, because up until everything was finalized, it seemed like one day it was going to be one thing, another day it was going to be another thing, and it was going to go up, it was going to go expectations versus reality. How did it all land, and what's it mean for those taking the SALT deduction?
I mean, for New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, California, it's great news. You get this it could be up to $40,000, depending on your income limits, your income, your adjusted gross income. That's the thing with just about everything, right? There is a cutoff. Nothing is unlimited. And if you make a lot of money, unfortunately, you don't get a whole heck of a lot out of this tax code these days. That is why it fascinates me that, we think the rich are getting away with murder, but meanwhile, they don't qualify for anything. So there's an income limit. Depending on your adjusted gross income, you may or may not be able to deduct up to $40,000 of your state and local taxes. That's great news.
When it comes to saving, can saving save you a tax time, meaning catch-up contributions, Roths and IRAs? What are some of the primary points for focus that a saver should have in their current and future planning for the best tax benefits?
Right. So everyone forgets the saver's credit. Pay attention to that. This year going forward now, if you are over 50, so myself and all my cohorts, that extra catch-up contribution for your 401k, it is now going into a Roth. So if you max out your 401k and you still are putting in that catch-up contribution for those of us 50 and older, it is going into a Roth. On some level, people might be annoyed about that because that means your take-home pay will be a little higher because that's after-tax dollars. But I think you'll be very happy in retirement when you get to pull that money out, all the growth, all the contributions tax-free. So that will be a big deal. And I think for a lot of companies, especially the smaller ones, they may or may not be prepared for this. So be patient with them but that's going to happen.
Dr. Tracy Byrnes, financial advisor, Lebenthal Global Advisors, columns of the Daily Signal, host of the podcast Women, Wealth, and What Matters. Deduct Everything, her new book. Learn more about the world of Tracy Byrnes at tracyburneswealth.com. And you're listening to Issues and Ideas. How much of a tax benefit can your vehicle be? I'm reading that section, I'm thinking back to my days in radio advertising sales, and man, that's that mild deduction. I thought I was going to get a red flag because the amount was literally astronomical, but that just made me from a taxpayer to a return receiver.
But that's the thing with all these things, right? If you qualify, take it. So many people are afraid to take deductions because they look too big and they think they're going to red flag the IRS. If they do, they do. If you have the backup for it and you qualify for it, you should take it. So if you drive, make sure you take the mileage deduction. If you use your car for work, make sure you take the deductions for that. The new thing in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act is this potential to deduct up to $10,000 in interest on a car loan. Again, very misleading. It has to be an American-made car. Again, you have to hit certain income limitations, and it is only the interest on the loan. It is not the actual loan. But again, if you bought a brand new American car, not a used vehicle, make sure you tell your tax preparer and have them run the numbers to see if you qualify. And like you just said, if you do a lot of driving, then you deserve that deduction back.
As well as for unreimbursed business workplace expenses, too. A lot of people, I think, overlook that one.
Totally. If your employer doesn't reimburse you, make sure you keep track of these things. If you are a 1099 employee, please keep track of all your stuff because, man, there's a lot of opportunity there to deduct things because you are self-employed and you're doing it on your own, and the government actually appreciates your hard work. And so make sure you keep track. Keep good records. I will say also that the IRS has finally entered the digitized world and would prefer everything be digital. So don't send the IRS a shoebox full of receipts. They don't want that. They don't even want your paper check anymore, quite frankly. They would rather you went on the IRS's site and paid that way or had it deducted out of your bank account. But keep track of all your expenses online. That way, if, God forbid, I'm Sicilian, we say God forbid, the IRS does ask for proof, you have it. And that's it. Don't be afraid. If the IRS questions you and you're right, you're right. They are not always right. They're wrong often, too.
Although, even though your book title does say deduct everything, don't go crazy. Don't start declaring your dog as a security system.
100%. That's what I'm saying. If it's a legit deduction, deduct it. Take it. And make sure you get your money back. But you're right. People push the envelope, right? Someone tried to deduct their wedding because they thought it was a networking event. I've heard of people trying to deduct their pools because it's for medical reasons. But if your doctor didn't write you a note, it's not a medical reason. So just be careful with pushing the envelope on stuff.
Final question, and especially with the last-minute filers, if you can't pay what you owe or think you're going to owe, the biggest mistake you could possibly make that you need to really avoid?
Yeah, pay something. So first of all, if you're not going to be ready by April 15th, that's fine. File an extension of Form 4868. Just file it. I would say the IRS is like a little kid. Just wants a little attention once a year. Give it the attention it wants. Send the form and say, I know I owe you something, but I'm not ready. That's it. Then you have till October 15th to prepare your return. You do not have till October 15th to pay. So if you ballpark as best you can, if you don't know the exact number, send something. And I will say the IRS is pretty lenient when it comes to getting on payment plans, and they offer all different methods of paying now. Take advantage of all of it. You can use your credit card, which I think is a terrible idea, but if you need to, use it. But pay something because otherwise you will be hit with interest, late payment penalties. You don't want all that. That stuff adds up so quickly.
And if you really annoy them, they might slap you with an audit just because they can.
Unfortunately, it's you know what? That's the problem. Everyone's scared of the IRS because they sort of do things out of left field sometimes, and you're like, wait, I'm an upstanding citizen. I work really, really hard, and now you're coming after me when, Joe Schmo down the street is making $1 zillion. Yes, it happens, unfortunately. But just document everything, and don't be afraid.
Well, if you're last-minute filing or if you want a better plan because you paid and you realize, I deserve better than that, Tracy's book is the go-to. Deduct Everything, hundreds of tax tips, legal write-offs, credits, and loopholes. Find out more about Tracy at tracyburneswealth.com. Tracy, you are, along with being a Jersey girl, we like that around here, you are indeed a savior for tax time and tax stress. Thank you so much for being here today.
It was my pleasure, and I do love being a Jersey girl.
If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, don't forget to follow or subscribe to us. Back in 1967, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke to students at Barrett Junior High Schools in Philadelphia and delivered a teaching asking those youths, what is your life's blueprint? It was an unplanned stop, and our reason there's a film of that speech is because the student took it upon themselves to film it. And that story holds a lesson that I believe my next guest greatly expands through his work of helping youth find and develop a direction for their lives by embracing a passion and building a plan for their lives. taking advantage of situations like that high school student in Philadelphia did, seeing an opportunity and taking it. His life is certainly a testimony, by the way, to how this can be done and the rewards that come from that focus and drive determination. His life took him from orphanages to military service to Wall Street leadership. He's developed a life design course that's been adopted by many schools and universities. He tells his story in the book, The Road Less Traveled, An Unlikely Journey from the Orphanage to the Boardroom. He's also written a companion book which presents the ideas of his life design course. That's called The 4 Ps, Modern Fable About Preparing for Your Future. Ed Hajim, how are you today, sir?
I am great. Nice to be on your show.
Well, thank you for providing such a great guidance for so many youths who are in such need, as we see in survey and poll and survey after poll. A couple of websites, Ed Hajim, HAJIM.com, and we'll also find more information about his life design course. We have those links at our homepage as well. It is often said, Ed, that our youth years determine our lives and who we'll wind up being, and to say the least, your life is quite the argument against that theory. Talk about your early years and some of the things you had to endure and even survive.
Well, it's a little bit of a long story, but I basically, my first 18 years, I spent time in hotels, motels. My father and mother got divorced when I was 3. Mother basically got custody, took me from Los Angeles to St. Louis. My father got visiting rights on Sunday and $5 a week of alimony and child support. He came a couple months after I was in St. Louis, picked me up, and instead of taking me to the movie or the park, he basically kidnapped me and took me back to Los Angeles, told me that my mother basically passed away. He told her not to look for us. If you want to find out what happened, you have to read the book. But anyway, over the next 15 years, I basically spent my time in hotels, motels. When the war broke up, my father was drafted in as a radio operator on a merchant ship, and I spent the entire war in 5 different foster homes. After the war, we came to New York, and I spent the summer in the YMCA at 34th Street, and then a hotel room in Coney Island. I did pretty well at PS 106 when my father couldn't find land-based work, so I ended up going back to sea, and I ended up in a couple of orphanages, one in Far Rockaway, which I did very well with, but I aged out of there, and my father totally disappeared, which is a very long story, and I became a ward of the state, ended up getting put in another orphanage in Yonkers, New York, which was close to a very good high school. And from there, I had a lot of luck. I did well in school, and the only 3-4 scholarships I got the Naval Scholarship, NROTC. That changed my life, and that's basically why one of the reasons I'm very strong on scholarships for kids. They can get to a certain point in their life, they need a small amount of funding to take them over that next hurdle. That's where I'm spending most of my philanthropy. I spent my life in addition to Wall Street, in education, boys' school, and the business school, and I also became the chairman of the board of trustees at the University of Rochester.
What do you see missing in kids today, in youths? Because I remember the comedian Jerry Lewis. He said there's various stages of life, infancy, adolescence, and adulthood. But between adolescence and adulthood, he called it, there's an age of stupid. And how long that age exists is really based upon the individual. What were you seeing in youth that compelled you, motivated you to come up with the life design course?
Well, see, I believe there are 2 kinds of education. One teaches you how to make a living, and a lot of our schools do a pretty good job of that. The second type of education is to teach you how to make a life. That was left to religion and parents and so forth in the old days. And with the change in society, the advent of AI, the advent of social media, the geopolitical reconfiguration, the game has gotten very complicated. So I think that I have a crusade. It's presumptuous, but I want to add a dimension to high school and college education where kids sit around and think about who they are, where they want to go, how they expect to get there, and if they've got time to find out if they get there, are they going to be happy about it? That's what my life design course does. And it's a simple course. It's been basic because I've taken it out to universities and high schools. I have nobody turn me down so far. They all agree that today's youth need time spent formally. Now, it used to be done in the dining room and in dormitories and so forth, conversation. Formally, in a freshman year, a student sits down, goes through this life design course, ends up with a plan, which he tries to execute over the next 4 years, testing various things. So when they graduate, they end up with a diploma and a roadmap for life. And by the way, the diploma has a lot of parts of it which become useless in a very short period of time, like my slide rule capability when I was an engineer for a few years. It was worthless, But this roadmap for life can last a lifetime. And I used that because I used it. I had these yellow pads, which I went through what I call my 4 Ps: finding your passions, finding your principles, find your partners, and then find your plans. But, this thing can last a lifetime, and I really believe people should start thinking about it. And it's only because the system has gotten much more complex. Grandpa went to school, learned something, spent his whole life at one company, and died. Today, kids have to pivot a number of times. What I'm trying to give these kids is a vocabulary for their inner voice, which will allow them to handle change. And that's basically what the Life Design course is. And it's simple, basically, just saying, who am I? And where do I want to go? And what's that road look like? And I go back through my life. In many cases, I did those tests. My sophomore year, I wanted to be a physicist. So as I was an engineer, I took an advanced physics course. Well, in a very short period of time, I realized that this was not for me. And, testing these things, these words you give people. What is an engineer? What is a lawyer? What do you do Monday morning? And getting those questions answered early on so you don't make too many mistakes in your life, I think is very important. But it is really because the system has gotten to be very complex. Now, as I've taken this out to schools, they say, absolutely, we need this. And it's been very interesting. I now have it in 10 schools, and I have it at both ends of the spectrum, as I call it. I have one where it's a very upscale, secondary school, and then I have one in Newark, which is basically mostly first gens. And they both seem to acquire an interest in it and find it very fascinating. I mean, let me take a simple example. When a kid is 16, 18 years old, he is a combination of his or her genes and their environment, over which they have no control. So in a sense, you have no control who you are. Then somewhere in that period, 18, 19, but what Jerry Lewis said, wake up one morning and you say, this is who I am. These are the parts of me I want to keep. This is the part of me I'd really like to get rid of or eliminate, reduce significance. And these are the parts of me I want to add. And that's what I want kids to do. And I want it to be overt, where they say, I really want to learn this because. And so that's my crusade. I spent my life, besides the Wall Street, I spent my life in education, being the chairman of the board of trustees of a boys' school, being the Harvard Business School, being on the Dean's Advisory Committee, which is the board basically. And then, of course, Rochester. I spent 30 years as a trustee at the University of Rochester. So I've really been immersed in education. This is what I see is needed. You got to give them money to get over that little hump there between 17 and 18. I got to go to college, cost a little bit of money, so I basically concentrated my philanthropy in basically scholarships. But on the other hand, we've got to take these young people and say, just take a little time off formally to ask the questions which are very important for you for a lifetime. And that's what Martin Luther King said. I think that's absolutely correct, exactly correct. And I think it can really help young people get that first step right, and that's most important. Sorry for the long answer.
No, I love long answers because that's how we all learn. I'm here to learn from you as the listener is right now. I'm not one of these hosts who come in thinking I'm going to know all and compete with you. I'm certainly not going to do that. We're talking with Ed Hajim and his story, his life at edhajim.com. We have the link at the homepage. You're listening to Issues and Ideas. I think the key to your program, too, Ed, is that it doesn't have one point of focus. You have passions, principles, partners, plans, because so many programs, so many education systems have just one direction, and that direction doesn't work for that one specific student. Well, then what? And with passions, Ed, do you find, because I know I found this over time, the toughest question you can ask someone of any age is what's your passion? Not what you like.
Passion? No. Passion is an overused word. It's your interests, your talents, and basically also your context. I mean, today Kiev and New Jersey are two different contexts. Your passions are very different, but you should dig down deeply and say, what do I really like? And also, I make it very clear to people, passions change over time. So you got to check in with yourself on a regular basis. I kid about this, but high school is when the first passion, so a real passion. If you want to be an ice cream truck driver or something when you're 4 years old, but somewhere in that period Jerry Lewis talked about, you start to come with real passions. Mine were math, science, baseball, basketball, and girls. And those are my passions. And then I went to college. Those sort of morphed. Baseball and basketball died after my freshman year, and it moved into extracurricular activities. And math and science evolved into chemical engineering. But even now, when I moved into extracurricular activities, in my junior year, I started a magazine. And basically, I found my real passion was putting people together to solve a problem. I really loved doing that. And that taught me that I really wanted to be a manager. So these are the kinds of things when you start testing yourself, you start to feel excitement. In fact, inside that, I found what I really got a kick out of it, and I didn't find it until 10 years later. Basically, I really got a kick out of helping people do better than they thought they could. And that's really very interesting because that makes you a very good manager because you're really interested in other people, and that's what really drives the system. And I think that was my success. Actually, I got a young fellow told me that somewhere middle career, he came and said, "I really like working for you." And I said, why? He said, because you really want me to succeed. So these are the kinds of, there are subtle passions. I have to play baseball. There are other passions which are deep-seated. And I think people have to keep sorting those things out. Now, what's my passion now? I mean, my passion used to be stock market, managing people. Now my passion is trying to get an idea out in, which is going to be very important. I always find this one sentence I love is, you're not going to live forever, but try to make things that will. And this course could go on to become, very important. If it gets important, I mean, I have a few years left in my life, and I'll do the best job I can. I'm hoping I'll create some other people which will take it and run with it. And my course basically is not my course. I tell every one of the schools, here it is. You've got to make it your course because you have a unique population. Each population needs different things. Sacred Heart, they're going to spend more time on principles than they may be on passions and partners. A place like New Jersey Technical Institute is going to spend more time probably on passions. And other people are going to start saying, hey, your most important things are partners. But I think this is a vocabulary. Keep asking yourself, what are my passions? Have my principles changed? And principles are very important. I mean, there's some basic principles, as you know, do unto others. But as life goes on, one of my principles on Wall Street was to live happy was to live hidden. No, it's don't go into press. I had a company to run. I was a CEO. So I didn't no press, no TV, no magazines, nothing. Now, of course, when I'm selling ideas and books, I've gone my Instagram. It scares me to death, and LinkedIn and so forth. But you have to change your principles as well, and that's what I say. Once every couple of years, you sit down with yourself and say, let's go through this thing. But it's nice because you have a vocabulary to go back and reference. It's not just starting all over again. Long answer, short question. Sorry, Chris.
No.
My daughter says, what are my weaknesses?
No, I'm learning it's your passion too. What you're doing here, and that's important because we have to wrap up here. But it's not just doing something, but watching what you're doing to make sure that it's working for you and it's what you want to be doing. And you always have to keep a level of awareness about yourself as you're going through life. Just to wrap up, Ed, how do schools bring your program in? What do they have to do? How can they get to you?
Well, I go to the school and I show them the program, and there's usually somebody in the either development or career counseling, or one school is in the English department. Somebody who's a zealot, catches on to say, I want to do this, and they go for it. Recently, Stony Brook picked it up and was picked up by the career center. At Rochester, the career center is doing over 200 kids in 10 different sections.
Wow.
Hobart has it as a required freshman course. Brunswick School has a required senior course. So each school is a little bit different. You have to find the person that's really interested. And of course, some can't, they need funding and so forth. I do a little bit of funding to help out because when you're starting something new, somebody's got to say, how am I going to offset the cost? So that's a problem. Some schools just can't do it, period. But no, I said I've approached 10 schools as operating right now, and I have another 10 schools that are in various stages of interest. So I'm having fun with it, and I think it's real because I'm getting people, I'm getting feedback from schools saying kids have really changed. They really have. They've changed their direction. They've changed their interest by studying themselves. So that's kind of fascinating to me.
You can find out more at Ed's website, Ed Hajim, HAJIM.com. Learn more about his books, The Road Less Traveled, as well as the 4 Ps, A Modern Fable of Preparing for Your Future. We have the link over at our homepage as well. Ed, when it comes to building a legacy that makes a difference long term, you have certainly succeeded in that, as you have in so many points of your life. Your life is indeed a lesson to learn from. And thank you for sharing that wisdom, that knowledge, that experience, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's always good to talk to somebody who likes what you're doing.
I hope you don't need me to tell you today is Easter. It's a day of faith, a day of prayer and praise. Sadly, this is one of only 2 days, and that's even maybe, the other being Christmas, that a growing number of people turn to faith, prayer, and praise. As we see all measures of hope and happiness decline among Americans for a variety of reasons, my next guest is leading an effort to bring people to what lifts spirits, strengthens, and guides us, prayer and faith. This effort is called Prayer at the Heart, and joining us to explain how its goals will be achieved, as well as the role that you can play in the program, is the founder and executive director, Dr. Douglas Small. How are you today, Doctor?
Well, Chris, thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you.
It's an honor to be with you.
Thank you for doing this. And the website to find out more, we do have this link at our homepage, prayerattheheart.org. Want to start with a few statistics. This is from a variety of sources, so I pretty much averaged out the numbers. U.S. adults who pray daily ranges between 44 to 55%. An additional 21 to 23% pray either weekly or a few times a month. And if you look at the demographics, as they call them, women more likely to pray than men, 50 to 37%, and older adults, meaning 65 and older, much more likely to pray daily than those under 30, 65 to 41%, respectively. What was your motivation, Doctor, for creating the Prayer at the Heart program? What were you seeing that you think you can have, with the power of the people behind you, have the answer to respond?
Well, Chris, there's so many ways I could answer that question. Your statistics focus on general prayer. In some ways, it focuses on what James, the brother of Jesus, would call caucus prayer or bad prayer. It's self-interested prayer. And what we're trying to do is say to the nation, you don't understand how critical your role is in intercessory prayer, in redemptive prayer, in inviting God to come to America. We've closed the door in many ways to him. And so this effort, we took 3,000 people to the heart of the nation 6 years ago. All 50 states were represented. It was a 6-hour event. They say 1 million people tuned into some part of it. Then the goal was to go to the heart of every state and every city and every county until everywhere there's outside public gatherings of prayer, crying out for a fresh spiritual awakening. That's what the nation really, really needs.
So we're so many times in trouble. I say it's an old joke, and it's meant that way, but after a school shooting, people will say to a Christian, well, where is your God? And the Christian says back to those people, he's trying to get into the school, but you keep slamming the door in his face.
Yeah, we have for 60 years now just watched the dominoes fall to exclude God. But there is a resurgence that beginning to happen. From Asbury forward, college campuses where you get 1,000 or more kids being baptized, the uptick in a search for God, a search for meaning. In many ways, Chris, I think we're not post-Christian. We may be pre-Christian in the sense that you have a whole generation now in America that doesn't know anything about Christ. They're walking into churches and saying, I've never been in a church before. Where do I go? What do I do? There's a hole in their heart that only a father, a good father, a loving father, a forgiving father can heal. So a part of our thrust is come home. Come home to church. Come home to a home you've never been to before. Come home to God. Come home to your Father. And we're hoping that 1 million Christians will share their faith by Pentecost Sunday. We're saying pray for 10, care for 5, share Christ with 3, win 1. And do it with 2 other people so you're not alone. You're not discouraged. In the 3.2 billion people who came to Christ in Billy Graham's crusade, 80% were saved by this method. 80% were on somebody's what they called the Operation Andrew guide. And this person and 2 of his friends were praying together every week, for John and Sally and Sue and whatever else. And they brought them to the crusade and they came to Christ. That's what we're praying. that on Pentecost Sunday, churches will be full of people. We've got 7 weeks to do this, full of people who have given their heart to Christ, or they're ready to give their heart to Christ.
And that certainly does please God when one sinner can be reformed. And you mentioned people walking into church now and not knowing what to do. The same thing with prayer. How do I pray? What do I pray? And the answer is very clear in Matthew 6:5-15. God first, our true needs, forgiveness, and refusing temptation.
And Paul gives us another thing in Timothy too. He talks about petitionary prayer and then worship and then intercessory prayer, which means to meet with the king in behalf of another person, and then Eucharistia, thanksgiving. And this is really Paul's concise theology of prayer. I think the part we've been leaving out is we don't understand that we are the gap between God and lost people around us. We've confused intercession with spiritual warfare. It certainly does involve that, but that's only incidental. The real issue in intercession is reconciliation. The first movement in evangelism is prayer, where you step in the middle. Well, Hallesby said you're like a satellite dish. You catch the beam of heaven and direct it here and here and there and there. Brueggemann, the theologian, says we pray here and God moves there. We pray now and God moves then. We're that indispensable, mysterious link in the middle. Even though we don't think anything's happening, the Holy Spirit is witnessing with us, the book of Acts says, and waking up their heart to Christ, to the reality of who God is and his love.
So how are you having people involved? Is it a matter of the individuals or churches, organizations?
All the above. You can go to Prayer at the Heart, and there's actually a guide that you can pull down. It's a 50-day prayer guide, but there's also a kind of a organizational thing just for you. And then there's one for the church, and then there's one for the county, and then there's one for the state. So we're looking for a kind of layered participation. Our prayer going into this is that all 50 states would be involved, and we now have all 50 states where we have a state leader, our state advocate. We wanted all 3,100 counties involved. I think we're going to get to a little less than half of that this year. We'll repeat this next year. And then our goal was to see 25,000 churches involved. I know that there are 25 to 30 Christian denominations or organizations involved in promoting this on their own. But the big thing, Chris, is I'm asking your listeners to be one of a million, reaching one of a million, reaching one of a million. Pray for 10, care for 5, share with 3, win 1. And a million would be twice as many as we've seen saved in recent years among all denominations for an entire year. A million would be like it would be a domino we would feel. It's not we need 35 million. We need a tithe of the nation. We need to get to a tipping point here, but that's too many to begin with. So a million would get us twice as far down the road in 50 days as we've been getting down the road, because we're afraid, we're intimidated, we're fearful of sharing our faith. So I'm just asking Christians to break your silence. And it's not about confronting people or quoting about good scripture. It's really about hearing their story and then letting them hear your story about how God changed your life, and then letting them hear his story. It's a blessing. The first word of God, Chris, to us in the Bible, the Father, was blessing. The last word of Jesus was blessing. Even the crucifixion could not quench that blessing. That's what we speak. Aaron spoke it over the people. We're to speak it. We have this extraordinary privilege of saying to people, God bless you. He wants to bless you. And he said to Aaron, if you'll speak the blessing, I'll do the blessing.
Which is why Jesus says, too, if you think that you're introverted or you don't want to impose or you're going in unarmed, for a lack of a better word, Jesus in Matthew 18:20 says, where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am there in the midst of them. You are not alone. You're not in this alone. And for those who are seeking answers, let them know that they're not alone. Through prayer, they can make the connection and feel God's love. and be blessed in every way that they're in true righteous need of. Find out more at prayerattheheart.org. It's time. The time is now. The program starts today. The goals are set. Your efforts, your prayer efforts, your spiritual efforts are needed to make this whole thing work. Again, prayerattheheart.org. Dr. Douglas Small, thank you for this inspirational opportunity for all those who are giving prayer, those who receive prayer. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much.
Reading from Matthew chapter 28, verses 1 through 8. Now after the Sabbath, as the first day of the week began to dawn, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven, and came and rolled back the stone from the door, and sat on it. His countenance was like lightning, and his clothing as white as snow. And the guards shook for fear of him, and became like dead men. But the angel answered and said to the women, Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus, who was crucified. He is not here, for he is risen, as he said. Come, see the place where the Lord lay, and go quickly and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead, and indeed he is going before you into Galilee. There you will see him. Behold, I have told you. So they went out quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy, and ran to bring his disciples word. Today, on this Easter Sunday, we celebrate the resurrection of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ by taking very careful note of the three most important words in verse 6. He is risen. Not he has risen, not he was risen, he is risen. It's important to understand this in order to understand and acknowledge that Jesus is forever. As Jesus declares in John chapter 8, verse 58, Jesus said to them, Most assuredly I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. This is why Jesus could foretell and reveal to his disciples what was to fall upon him. We read his words in Luke chapter 9, verse 22, The Son of Man must suffer many things, and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and be raised the third day. This prophecy by Jesus is also revealed in the 8th chapter of Mark with an extra message for those who cast doubt on the resurrection. In Mark, after Jesus reveals what's to come, Peter rebuked him. Here's how Jesus responded in Mark chapter 8, verse 33. But when he had turned around and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter, saying, Get behind me, Satan, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men. Did you know that the resurrection of Jesus means the resurrection of us? Without Jesus, we're spiritually dead. With him, we are brought to a resurrected life. This is explained to us in 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 through 5. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who according to his abundant mercy has begotten us again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance incorruptible and undefiled, and that does not fade away, reserved in heaven for you, who are kept by the power of God through faith for salvation, ready to be revealed in the last day. Paul goes even further and more direct in Romans chapter 6, verses 4 through 6. Therefore we were buried with him through baptism into death, that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we also should walk in newness of life. For if we've been united together in the likeness of his death, certainly we also should be in the likeness of his resurrection, knowing this, that our old man was crucified with him, that the body of sin might be done away with, that we should no longer be slaves of sin. Discussions of the resurrection of Jesus will often lead to a discussion about the Shroud of Turin, the burial cloth of Jesus. Is it real? Is it fake? Yeah, that debate has gone on for centuries, hasn't it? In fact, this past week, I read two news articles. One said that nuclear scientists have proven that the shroud is legitimate. Another news report the very next day said that the authenticity of the shroud can't be proven because of all the foreign matter it's picked up over the centuries. Let me ask you this question. Did God allow the shroud to be turned into a test of faith? Do you need the Shroud of Turin to be authentic in order for you to believe that the resurrection of Jesus is true? Are you a doubting Thomas? You remember Tom, don't you? Thomas was one of the disciples when Jesus appeared to his disciples after his death and resurrection. Thomas wasn't in the room. He was on the coffee run that morning. When the others told Thomas about what he missed, didn't believe them. Well, Jesus took care of this matter. In John chapter 20, verses 26 through 29, and after 8 days his disciples were again inside, and Thomas with them. Jesus came, the doors being shut, and stood in the midst, and said, "Peace to you." Then he said to Thomas, "Reach your finger here, and look at my hands, and reach your hand here, and put it into my side. Do not be unbelieving, but believing." And Thomas answered and said to him, "My Lord, my God." Jesus said to him, "Thomas, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen, and yet have believed." Part of living a resurrection life involves living the words found in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7, "For we walk by faith, not by sight." So rejoice on this Easter, for he is risen. Say it with me, for he is risen. Be sure to check out our website, issuesandideasradio.com. That's where you'll find more information about the guests who joined us here on the show today. And if you've been listening via your favorite podcast platform, don't forget to subscribe or follow us so you never miss a single episode. Always thankful, grateful for your time and attention. Very special and important to us. Look forward to being with you right here this time for our next edition of Issues and Ideas. Have a happy and blessed Easter.